Okay, so what if I told you that the best way to spot a lie has nothing to do with someone's eyes, but everything to do with the tip of their pencil? Yeah, seriously. Today, we're going to dive into some fascinating science about how a simple sketch can unravel even the most complex deception. So let's be real. How do you actually spot a lie? We've all seen the movies, right? The shifty eyes, the nervous twitch. Well, you can pretty much forget all that. Decades of research tells us that those classic tells are, frankly, almost useless. They're super feigned and just not reliable. So, yeah, all those old myths are getting tossed out the window for some new science. And you know what that science is pointing to? A surprisingly low tech tool you probably have on your desk right now, a simple pencil. Researchers are finding that the real clues might not be in what someone says, but in what they draw. So let's start by digging into the problem this new method is trying to solve. So here's the core problem we're up against. For years, investigators have been in a really tough spot. Why? Because all those traditional verbal and nonverbal cues we think we know, they're just not great. They're faint, they're unreliable, and that's a huge challenge when you're trying to get to the truth. To get around this, investigators came up with some pretty clever methods, like something called the cognitive interview. The whole idea is to help a witness remember more by getting them to mentally put themselves back in the scene. And it's from this focus on memory that someone had a brilliant idea. Hey, what if we just asked them to draw the event? And just like that, this simple little addition turned a memory tool into a potential lie detector. But why does this even work? I mean, it's just a sketch, right? Well, the answer is all in the psychology. It comes down to the huge difference in brain power it takes to remember something that actually happened versus, making something up out of thin air. And this right here perfectly explains this idea of cognitive load. Just look at the difference. On one side, you've got the truth teller. Their job is pretty straightforward. Just recall a memory. But on the other side, wow. The liar's brain is going into overdrive. They have to invent a plausible story, act totally normal, and keep an eye on the interviewer to see if they're buying it. It's a massive mental juggling act, and it is exhausting. This is exactly where sketching becomes a total game changer. It plugs right into that difference in brain power. For a truth teller, drawing can actually help them remember more, jogging their memory for those little details. But for a liar, oh boy, it ramps up their cognitive load like crazy. Now, they don't just have to invent a story, they have to invent a whole visual story that matches their words. The best part? It's super easy to do in an interview and makes the difference between a truth and a lie way more obvious. So we know sketching helps, but what's the absolute best way to use it? Well, to figure that out, researchers set up this really clever experiment, kind of like a three-way sketch-off, to see which method would come out on top. So here's how it worked. They brought in 108 people, everyone watched the same video of a meeting about a mock terrorist plot. Then they split them up. Half were told to tell the truth about what they saw, and the other half had to lie and make up some key details. Now, each person was interviewed using one of three different techniques. Some had to sketch their story first and then talk about it. Others talked first and then sketched. And the third group? They had to do both at the exact same time. The whole point was to figure out which of these methods made the lies easiest to spot. And the results were pretty remarkable. Just as they predicted, the biggest clues weren't just in what people were saying, but in what they were putting down on paper. Let's take a look at the actual visual evidence. Okay, on the left, you see a sketch that was rated as implausible, and on the right, one that was rated plausible. And this right here brilliantly illustrates the core finding of the entire study. Just as the researchers put it, it all comes down to the details. The implausible sketch is vague, it's abstract, but look at the plausible one. It is just full of specific, rich details. Things like a foggy window or a teddy bear in plastic. These are those weird, specific things that are hallmarks of a real, lived memory, not some story you just made up. And this pattern held true across a bunch of different measurements. The truth teller's sketches were seen as way more plausible, and they even included more people. But check out this fascinating psychological tidbit. They tended to draw from an over-the-shoulder perspective, the view they actually saw. Liars, on the other hand, often used this detached, overhead view, like they were describing a map of a scene they were never really in. And this wasn't just in the drawings. When they looked at the verbal accounts, truth tellers also gave way more detail. So the takeaway here is really clear. Whether you're sketching or speaking, honesty seems to be tied to a much higher level of specific, rich detail. So, after this whole sketch off, which method actually won? Well, the answer kind of depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to get the most information, or are you zeroed in on spotting a lie? Let's look at the verdict. When it came to just gathering the most information possible, there was a clear winner. You can see it right here. The method where people sketched and spoke at the same time, the synchronous method, got way more verbal details out of them than talking first and then sketching. So for pure information gathering, having someone speak and sketch at the same time is absolutely the way to go. The researchers think it's because the act of drawing slows everything down, which gives an honest person more time to kind of mentally walk through their memory and pull out all those rich details. But what about just for spotting lies? This is where it gets really interesting. It turns out the specific method didn't matter nearly as much as you'd think. The single best clue to a lie, no matter which of the three methods was used, was simply the plausibility of the story, both in the sketch and in the words they used. So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, while there's no magical lie detector, this research gives us a really powerful new strategy. By asking someone to sketch while they speak, you don't just get more information, you force them to create a story that is either rich and believable or vague and implausible. The truth, it seems, really is in the details. And it kind of makes you wonder, if a simple sketch can reveal this much, what other hidden truths are just waiting to be drawn out?